heat waves seem to be happening more often. What is happening?
So our climate is warming. We've put a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. They act like a blanket around our planet, trapping heat. So the air is warming, our oceans are warming. And this warming supercharges our weather systems, and we get extreme weather. So that's the heavy downpours, the storms, the heat waves, and they're happening in places that never had them before, and they're happening more frequently and more intensely. And when we look at heat, it's really underappreciated, in my opinion. People have a positive association with heat. We go to warm climates on vacation. But heat is actually the leading weather-related killer of all climate hazards. More illnesses and deaths from extreme heat than all other weather hazards combined. And as you mentioned, with heat, recent heat in our area, we have had record heat across many parts of the world and Canada. In 2021, we had the heat dome in British Columbia, and very sadly, 619 people passed away. 2 years ago in Europe, 61,000 deaths from extreme heat. And then just recently, the heat dome across Canada and the US. And this is really dangerous and oppressive heat. And the reality is that the warming that we have is here to stay. And we're going to continue to have these types of extreme heat events going forward, and we need to prepare.
You said something that I think is really interesting. You said that heat is underappreciated. Just this past weekend at Mecca, I think over 1,500 people died because of the heat. But I think for a lot of us, it's like, oh, this is summer. Can you define what's the difference between the hot weather that people might experience in summer as opposed to extreme heat?
So extreme heat is elevated temperatures for a prolonged period of time, and there can be humidity. So when you add humidity to that, it raises the risk. And heat waves and heat domes, those terms can sometimes be used interchangeably. Sometimes we think of heat domes as having a high pressure system that traps air beneath it. That air warms up and it can't escape. But these type of events, regardless of what we call them, they convey a sense of this is a hazard, it's a hazard to our health, and it's a hazard to populations that are more vulnerable or more sensitive to heat, and we need to be taking those populations into account and caring for them.
We're going to talk more about that, but Housen, is this something that we're going to be seeing for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, the unfortunate reality in a city like Toronto, which is where I do most of my work, is that we're expecting the number of days where the temperature exceeds 30 degrees to more than triple. So right now we see about 20 of them a year. We're expecting by the 2040s anywhere between 60 or 70 of them. So it's a serious, serious issue, and we need to ensure that all Torontonians and tenants in particular, and especially vulnerable populations, are protected from these extreme heats as we continue to do the work of actually cutting our greenhouse gas emissions from things like oil and gas and other fossil fuels.
CBC reported that over 100 heat records were broken in Canada last week on June 19th. Yet there are still people who are still insisting that this is just normal hot weather. How do you convey to people the seriousness of what we're seeing right now, Caroline?
So I think people need to recognize that even though we spend time outdoors and we enjoy being in warm weather, that if we're in a hot environment, and that can be outdoors or indoors for a prolonged period of time, there can be negative health implications. And as Housen mentioned, indoor overheating can be a real problem. We saw in British Columbia during the heat dome in 2021, 98% of the deaths that occurred during that heat dome, very sadly, they were people who were indoors. So it really speaks to this kind of urgency around understanding indoor heat, indoor overheating, and taking measures to protect against that. And just generally, we set our thermostats at about 21 degrees. That's a really comfortable temperature for indoor environments. And anywhere from 21 to 26 degrees C is considered safe. And then from 26 to 31 degrees, there's more risk, and you can have some general negative health consequences from that. And then above 31 degrees Celsius, for an extended period of time, it can be dangerous for almost everyone.
I have two kids in school, elementary school, and my daughter is in a portable, and it's been more than 26 degrees in her portable. Housen, who ends up being impacted the most when extreme heat weather events happen?
It's typically folks like the elderly, people who are have on certain medications, for example, people who don't have very strong social connections are at risk because people aren't necessarily checking in on them. So it's a series of people across the population that are seriously at risk when temperatures go up. And so we saw this again, as you said, in British Columbia, where most of the victims and people who perished were inside their own homes. And so we need to make sure that we have things like mechanical cooling and things like that, because this is not going away, right? Like there was a point in time when air conditioning and mechanical cooling was considered, or indoor cooling in general was considered a luxury, and it's just no longer the case anymore. It used to be considered that indoor heating was a luxury, and then at some point we, as a society, decided we need rules and regulations and things like that to ensure that there is heating indoors during the wintertime. So we need something for the summer as well.
So you're saying air conditioning is not a luxury, it's a necessity?
Yeah, indoor mechanical cooling in general or indoor cooling, cool spaces is not a luxury. It used to be considered that way. It was marketed that way for the longest time. But it's important because as we've seen in British Columbia, when a heat event occurs and extends for a longer period of time, what ends up happening is people end up having serious health issues and sometimes deaths.